Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions now or during today's presentation, please type them into the chat box or questions pane in the Zoom control panel. Without further ado, I would like to pass the platform to Dr. Horvath, President at Campus Consortium. Over to you, Garth.
Thank you, Lily and Jennifer. Thanks to the team that always puts our webinars together every month. Much appreciated. And David also. My name is Carl Horvath. I'm the President and CEO of Campus Consortium. And today we have a webinar about what many schools are working on in terms of compliance. And every month we try to bring you something that's affecting education. We have two guest panelists, Vince and Brian, and I'll introduce them in just a second. First, I'd like to start with a poll question, and we always ask a series of poll questions, and then we report this out to you, the attendees, with some information about how the respondents have answered these questions to get a sense of what everybody else is doing in the education sector. Does your institution have someone responsible for IT security compliance, policy, process, and procedures? Yes, our IT department, we don't have anyone dedicated or we outsource it. So if you just take 30 seconds to answer that question, I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Campus Consortium has been around for a while. The mission is to advance education through technology, access, and affordability and innovation. And we worked to do that over the past several years. Most recently, we have been watching the trends change significantly, and we are trying to address those trends for our member institutions and for those who are not members too. We support all of education in both the higher education and the K-12 school districts across the U.S. We have a number of different services. If you're interested in becoming a member, we're happy to talk with you about your needs. And we do have a governance committee made up of education institution members. If you're interested in participating in that, we'd be pleased to have you. So the results of our first question looks like yes, or our IT department handles it through shared responsibility. And that is good. The 32% actually have someone focused on that because there's a lot to do and it's been growing, as we'll hear from our guest speakers. And of course, there's always some schools that need to invest the time and get caught up. And that's what the purpose of these education webinars are for. So you can get access to resources to help you be compliant and to protect your students, staff, and faculty. And I'm going to introduce our panelists, but first I just quickly would like to acknowledge some of the attendees. I see that we have some great schools here. We're looking at some very diverse roles in terms of who's attending, and there's CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, there's CIOs, we have a president, we have vice presidents, CFOs, vice president for finance administration, and we also have some nonprofit organizations. We have a mixture of superintendents from schools in the K-12 district. Most of the attendees are higher education, but there's a good showing from K-12. We have Foston Public Schools, good to see you. We have Alabama College of Osteopathic Medicine. And we also have Bucknell University. Thanks for joining. Cornell University, CISO. Thank you for joining. Oh, Bobby Adamala, is that you? Thank you for being here. And we also have Ann Wood from Juniata. Haven't seen Ann for a while, and thank you for joining. We also have Bob Hoster. Thank you for joining. Pillar College, St. Louis University, University of District of Columbia, Waldorf University, and several others. So thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time, and we'll try to make this a value-packed webinar. So that you can take this back to help your institution. First, our panelists, we have Vince. Vince Vargaria is a cybersecurity leader. He's been doing this for a long time. He's very deeply knowledgeable about IT security frameworks, network auditing, information security, and policy. And he is hands-on, but also a big picture thinker. And he really ties the IT security expertise that he has into the business process. In this case, it's teaching and learning and running our institutions to ensure the protection of students, faculty, and staff, and secure business processes, whether it's payments or online learning. We also have Brian Cornell, who's the Chief Information Security Officer at Oculus IT. And Brian's a longtime technologist, has been working in the leadership roles in technology, and has acted as a CIO and a CISO in multiple institutions before his current job, which is servicing all institutions across the U.S. And we thank both Vince and Brian for joining us today. Today's topic of discussion are three main issues that many institutions have been working with, and that's the annual single audit. A lot of schools have a budget year that starts July 1st and end May 31st. And then there's a closing of the books and opening of the books for the next year. And there are several IT compliance controls that have to be analyzed by the auditors when they audit the institution's end of year single audit. So we'll dive into a little bit more about that. There's also GLBA compliance. We know this has been on the radar of many CIOs for a long time. And luckily, the deadline was extended, and that helped some folks, but there's still some work to do for others. So we'll talk more about the state of GLBA in this presentation too. And finally, cyber insurance. That's another that can vary with renewals, but that's another consideration. And although these are distinctly different, there are common ties between the three of these. And we really encourage our attendees to ask questions or inputs of our panelists. And you can submit your questions to the Q&A panel or the chat, and we will be happy to ask our panelists these questions so they can answer. Or if you wish to follow up at the end, we can certainly connect you with the panelists. Here's our next poll question. Is your institution prepared for annual financial single audit IT requirements? So I think many of our CIOs are likely working with auditing firms where you have to gather documentation regarding controls and policies and upload those to the audit portal or gather them for a meeting with the auditor. And so the first response will be, we have most of the IT policy, process, and procedures documents that were requested. Or number two, we have some IT policy and procedure documentation, but we're still working on some. And the third, of course, is we do not have most of what's needed. And please answer these questions. Certainly, these are anonymous questions. No one will know it's you. And we just appreciate the feedback, and we'll report this in a poll so you get a sense of who is in these different states of being. And here's our results already. Looks like a lot of folks are mostly good, 41%. We have 53% that are, everybody gets into that state of having to kind of balance getting everything done for compliance and then keeping all the other IT projects and initiatives going. And certainly there's always going to be folks that are a bit behind and need some support. And that's what Campus Consortium is for, is to help you if you don't have the resources and you're not prepared, to help you get there. And we're happy to help you with resources or contacts or even advising and assistance. So I'm going to just, I guess, this is going to be a little different than some of our other webinars. In some of our other webinars, we have a list of panelists that will present each section of the webinar themselves. And there is some interaction, but it's linear. In this presentation, since we have two experts in the area of IT security, and they have different roles in IT security, and they've seen so much of what we're going to be talking about today with many different schools, we're going to make this a little more interactive, where we'll have a discussion throughout this entire presentation. So I'm going to hand it over to Vince. And Vince, I know that you wanted to lead off with some information about some IT security issues that have recently been in the news.
Yeah, thanks, Carl, and good afternoon, everyone. And also, Carl, you being humble, introducing me in detail, so thanks a lot for that. I definitely would like to tell everyone that there were a lot of breaches which already has happened this year, and then the information impact is tremendous, which brought a lot of institution to stand still. There were hackers who were able to get inside the environment, could not just steal the data, but then brought them down for almost days, weeks, or maybe months. Here are a few of the examples where in city of Oakland, California, experienced a breach, and then it was a ransomware event wherein the attackers demanded a ransom after compromising not just the servers, but then these servers were hosting critical services, emergency services, and hence city was really firefighting. And this was, I would say, one of a kind wherein the attackers, in a phase-wise way, start publishing the data which they have compromised or taken control on. The first release happened right after 3 weeks of the breach, wherein they uploaded around 10 GBs of employee rosters, police records, social security number, and after that, there was a second upload, which was of 600 GB, and it was covering a lot of ex-servants or public workers data, which was crucial. Idly, federal and DOE or the other departments are closely watching such kind of stuff. So if everyone is aware, and if not, recent guidelines on the GLBA now imposes penalties in case there is a financial breach or the institutions are not following the right security controls. And then this, in general, starts with a penalty of $100,000, which I'm going to cover later into the slide. The other such incident happened at City of Hayward, wherein there was a cybersecurity incident, though there would not be any data which got stolen, but then they were again put on a halt. And lastly, and the recent one with the national clearinghouse for the students, wherein because of the Move It tool, the entire data hosted within them was compromised. They start reaching out to the federal authorities, to all of the institutions, companies where their data was belonging to. One of the reasons I'm really showcasing this of the data, so that we know how crucial it has become to own the data, as well as ensures that it's not get breached, because now you are following a lot of controls pushed by federal guidelines, NIST, and then in case you're hosting the data for the foreign countries, you're liable for their laws such as GDPR. So it's crucial to know what are the various regulatory norms aligned with your institutions. You may also fall for the state compliances. One should be looking for whether there is if the school belongs to the California region, they should know if there are any state laws for California aligned for the data privacy. Iowa's have their own rule, and same applies for the other states. So, ensure that you have someone leading that discovery and aligning all of your security controls, rationalizing your preparation policies in line with it, so that you don't really fall for any penalties. This would also help you to know your gaps wherever you're failing, so that you could quickly fix them and then keep your safeguards high, so that you don't fall for any such intrusion in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. Thank you, Carl. I'm Brian Cornell. It's a pleasure to join you in this webinar today. We share a common goal with security. We all have an institutional obligation to protect our assets, and that includes our data and the data of our customers. The MOVE-IT incident is very widespread. I believe it's going to be historical. I believe it's going to be the largest data breach in the history of higher education and other industries. There's not many organizations that were not touched by this type of a compromise. And what can we do to protect ourselves? What can we do to get ahead of the game? What can we do to stay proactive in our security measures and implement those standards and best practices? You know, of course, we can continue sharing information and knowledge like we're doing today, but we can also get those audits and assessments that we need to have, because that's kind of taking a deep dive into your environment and pointing out inadequacies in some of your safeguards. Another thing, all the laws and regulations and the mandates that blanket various industries, they're there for a reason. They're not trying to be bad and make our lives miserable. As a result of these breaches and these incidents that have happened in the past, the laws continue to change. I have a feeling for many industries, these regulations are only going to get a lot stricter. And we see that with the GLBA, which we're going to talk about here soon. GLBA used to have some recommendations, and then the new mandates that took effect just last month, they changed a lot of those recommendations into requirements. So again, just welcome myself, and I just want to thank you for joining us in our presentation, and I hope that you're able to walk away learning something, take something away, and sharing in our continuing mission of securing our environments.
Thank you, Vincent and Brian. Yeah, this is the MOVE-IT was big news for everybody, and it goes to show you that everyone is vulnerable, even though they're a larger organization. We've seen news stories about big retail companies, banks, health systems that have been compromised, and they often have robust IT security resources to protect personally identifiable information and other sensitive data. And it's always a surprise. And this just goes to show you that you really, as an institution, need to be protective of your student, your staff, and your faculty data, and the institutional data that's sensitive. And it's important to have a plan in place just in case something like the incidents you just reported happen to the institution. So one of the things that everyone has been dealing with lately, not everyone, but many schools, because it's how their budget fiscal year is dated, July 1st through May or through June. And the annual single audit is required, especially for institutions who are distributing federal funds. There are other requirements and regulations that require the audit. And every year, IT has a big part to play with that audit in terms of controlling who has access to financial data and personal records, and how those roles in the systems are managed and protected, so other bad actors do not have access to those critical systems for the institution, students, faculty, and staff. So higher education, and in some cases, K-12 school districts expend dollars that exceed $750, and sometimes that figure changes a year. But if they do expend funds to support students, then they are subject to these audits. And in the case of higher education, there's typically a local or regional auditor that will come in and has a relationship with the institution, and they work closely with the finance department and other departments to complete that audit. So there are several documents online, especially in the government websites, that outline the requirements of institutions if they're distributing federal funds, and in some cases state funds. And there's checklists that you can download and check to see if you're in compliance. But it's not enough just to visit a website. You really do need the expertise and someone who can see the big picture of IT security in your environment. And these are often the things that the accounting firms will ask the institution for. These are policies, procedures, and beyond this, there are several technology documents that are also required because they often have a technology auditor or team that will look at the technology controls in place and the staffing and the policies. So they have specific expertise in these areas. And as was mentioned earlier in some of these stories, state and federal audit considerations, they may vary. From a global perspective, there are considerations, but also state by state. So I'm going to hand this over to our panel, Brian and Vince. Any inputs on the annual single audit? I know I'm helping a institution now with their annual single audit, and it's more documents, and I've been doing this helping schools for a number of years. It seems this year, more now than ever, they're asking for much more information than they have in the past.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, since I'm always involved in these audits where departments are, keep creating the data points and then throwing it for the audit. First of all, I would suggest that to consider going for these audits annually as a practice, because I've seen institutions, if they've gone for one audit now, they kind of skip it for the next year. Considering that, since they've gone for it recently, they have all of the maturity which is needed. So do not consider or take it for granted, because at times you have done a lot of changes in your environment. Your policy needs to be up to date. You may be failing because a lot of controls keep changing as guided by the federal laws, or maybe other payment gateways laws. Your PCI DSS may not do that substantial change, but then federal guidelines keep changing, which we have saw recently with the GLBA. They amended a lot of laws and then enforced that changes immediately. So, one needs to be quite up to date about these changes. And then they could be, in case they're going for that single audit, either financial or compliance related, they go regularly. Also, it's always important to have some takeouts from these audits, right? It's always important to know where the things are failing and then start acting with a strategic plan. You can really decide your priorities. What are the key gaps you want to fix now? Could be immediate, and then what are the stuff which you can park basis on what are the funds available to the institution or IT for doing that corrective actions. Yeah, I mean, that's the only suggestions I would have. These are very important considering the departments. And then despite IT is not directly involved in the financials, but then since a lot of softwares, applications, web services are dependent through the IT, so they're pretty much involved. IT should lead such kind of audit alongside the finance and then make it success.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. And I want to jump in. What happens after you get an audit? What happens after you get a pen test or any kind of vulnerability assessment? What do you do now? These are going to provide some call outs where you could make some improvements, but what's next? And I've seen time after time after time, an institution will get in trouble. They'll be breached, there'll be some kind of malicious activity. And as you know, you're called in to help, lead that response. I've seen that then reviewing past audits, I've seen that the same finding that was called out, a year ago or 2 years ago had still never been remediated. And if it had just been remediated, this institution wouldn't have gotten into the trouble they had gotten themselves into. So it's very important that after any kind of audit or assessment, somebody is designated to lead the remediation, and that's creating a remediation plan and strategy, as Vince talked about, in actually prioritizing what it is you need to do first. But don't just put it on a shelf and let it get dusty and say, we did it, we can check the box that we had an annual audit. You need to actively and aggressively track those risks and keep working on reducing the attack surface or mitigating any of those call outs. So I wanted to focus on the tail end of what you do after that. And it is very important to then come back again and recheck. You don't run one pen test in 10 years. Things do change, exploits make themselves available again. Any kind of software changes create different holes or opportunities for threat actors to get in. So you want to continually be looking at yourself and continually improving and assessing your entire environment.
Great inputs. And I have received many management letters from auditors, follow-ups. So after the audit, you need to be doing A, B, C, D. And I think that it can get expensive. And what do you do first? And who do you work with to address those issues are all important. The issue is also that it costs money and it takes time and resources. And I think the most important thing from at least my experience in working with audits has been the following year, the auditors would like to see progress. As you noted, Brian, that what do you do after? Well, you have to do something. And you may not be able to solve all those problems immediately, but if you prioritize them and you make some progress on it, that's a positive thing for auditors to see the following year. And it's good to have someone responsible for that, as you said, too. I'd like to pose another poll question to the attendees, please. Was your institution able to meet the GLBA IT requirements by the June 2023 deadline? Yes, we were ready. Somewhat. No, we haven't yet started, or I'm unsure of where my institution stands with GLBA compliance. And if you could just take 30 seconds to answer those questions, we would appreciate that. And speaking of GLBA, the GLBA impacts higher education institutions by mandating compliance with privacy and security rules related to student financial records. Now, we do have some K-12 school district folks that are attending, and some of these regulations and requirements will affect some sectors of education and not others. But overall, everything that we are talking about is important for all institutions because it revolves around a good IT security stance and good practices within every institution. And so here's results of our third poll. Was your institution able to meet the GLBA IT requirements? And yes, we were ready, 18%. And yes, I know many institutions that are about halfway there or just about there. Thank goodness the deadline was somewhat extended, but still working on it. And then some folks are unsure of what the status is at this point. So, okay, that's good that you're here attending this webinar so you can follow up and help your institution ensure that it is in compliance. So the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act requires financial institutions to ensure well, if they are offering financial products or services, which many higher eds do, that they are safeguarding the sensitive data, personally identifiable information and financial information. Sometimes student parent information is also at risk. And so there is a checklist, just like we had for the audit and what we'll have for our cybersecurity. There's always a checklist, but these checklists are just the tip of the iceberg. You really have to take a deep dive to make sure that you are compliant in all areas. So I want to open this up for our panel. Brian and Vince, tell us about your experience in working with educational institutions and the GLBA compliance deadlines.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to appreciate federal folks or federal authority who did enforce it in time. And then, also thank God they changed the definition about an institution to fall within the category, right? Higher ed never been serious onto the GLBA, and not just GLBA. I think we've been lame about following any of the controls. We were looking for users, I would say, we will always be helping users, not asking them to change their passwords so often. We've been not imposing MFAs. We were also not conducting training because we thought that it could be a pain for a user to go through 30 or 45 minutes training, since a lot of them are occupied and they don't give time for that. But really, I appreciate federal authorities, and followed by Department of Education, who took it seriously and then enforced not just the security controls, but then also imposes some of the penalties rule, wherein the institution, if they don't follow it, may encounter $100,000 or maybe more than that if the data breach happens, and then the officers who could not really follow the right guidelines may go for the prison. So that's the kind of rules which have been taken care by the federal authorities. As an auditor, and then at times working as a CISO for a lot of institutions, it's become challenging to really achieve all of it in that short period of time. Thanking federal again, they gave a bit of relaxation and then switching it to 6 months timelines, but then that's not enough for a lot of institutions. But then at least if you have started working on a strategic roadmap where you fix these callouts where you're not matching up, I think that would be sufficient enough, at least at least better than doing nothing. So if you are on a journey to be compliant with the GLBA, if you have taken a step, finding the gaps and then start fixing those, great. If you have not, this is the right time to start doing it. DOE may conduct individual audits later part of the year, wherein you may see the auditors coming without notice to your institution, searching for your compliance and imposing the penalties, which could be a worst case. Also, if following all of these compliance would definitely make your posture very strong, and then it's very unlikely that you're gonna expose yourself to any of the ransomware event or any other kind of attack wherein the users exfiltrate in, exploit your data and take it out.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. As a CISO, and just with the new deadline being just last month, I've been spending a lot of time helping institutions with the GLBA compliance. A lot of them are seeking the GLBA specific assessments. I'm helping them draft those remediation plans and seeing them from, beginning of the draft to, final remediation. A lot of people don't understand GLBA. Some people have never heard of it. And what's been happening recently is with the mandate, the new law going into effect just in June of this year, GLBA has been surfacing and coming to the attention of a lot of leadership at institutions as they go to a conference or a webinar such as this. GLBA is a major topic, and then they're going back to their home company or their home campus, and they're asking those questions amongst the data stewards in the IT departments. And really, a lot you do with security is under the GLBA blanket. So for example, but it's not just GLBA, it's PCI, it's FERPA, it's HIPAA, it's GDPR. There's some commonalities that match amongst these various laws and regulations. For example, a security awareness training program, that's a requirement of PCI. It's a requirement of HIPAA. It's also a requirement of the GLBA. I think what a lot of people struggle with is trying to get their leadership to buy into it. There's many IT leaders out there, registrars, a lot of different CISOs, and they go to their leadership and they're trying to tell them that we are non-compliant. We have to do more. We could get in trouble here. And gaining that support is sometimes challenging depending on your current environment and the politics behind the scenes. How can you force somebody to take a security awareness training if human resource or your leadership does not support that initiative? And I think that's a lot of challenge. It's challenging for many, but the GLBA is something that we have to follow. We're not telling you to do MFA, or we're not telling an end user that they can no longer be an administrator of their machine because of least privilege. We're following these laws, regulations, and mandates. We're trying to make sure that our institution isn't on, I think, slide number 2, 3, or 4, where we were listed as being a victim of ransomware. That's what we're trying to do. And I think to be successful, we just got to keep trying to change the culture and educate people, keep building consensus on some of these laws and reasons why security projects and initiatives are happening. We're not just doing it. We need to include people and explain to them why we're doing certain things. Everybody shares in security as a responsibility. Everybody should understand what the GLBA is and what it means to them in their role and at their institution, no matter how unique it may be from one place to another. And that's just a little suggestion that I've seen as a successful ingredient in changing the culture and actually becoming compliant. Yes, there's a lot of controls that IT can just go in and change, and it helps compliance, but a lot of this takes support from the top and somebody to have the vision and create the strategies and the roadmaps to actually see it through and keep moving towards compliance together.
Yes, you speak from the relationship and the culture aspect, because that's very important. And I'm sure that many CIOs and CISOs have been concerned about these requirements, but they have had difficulty in some institutional cultures in providing education to the community, because it can look punitive sometimes. But I think it's the approach and having the right vehicle to provide that education information. And there are ways to do this to raise awareness and continue to do that throughout the year without impacting the workflow or making it a negative learning experience. So I appreciate your discussion on the cultural aspect of it too.
Yeah,
Hey,
Carl.
Yeah.
Carl, I just want to jump in and say one more thing. I've been there, whether you're a CIO, whether you're a CISO, different organizations, different management, different campus communities, and you come forward with an idea because you know you need to do it and you get shot down. The last thing we want to do, and I know it's aggravating and it's very frustrating, is don't ostrich it. Don't put your head in the sand and say, well, I tried. What we need to do is continue, just go back, regroup, come forward with a different approach, grab in a few different stakeholders that may be able to help you out. If you're in a campus, you're trying to push this, you're getting pushback, grab some faculty advocates on your side, let them help you too. Get people to trust you and get them on board. it just reminds me of my son who comes to me and says, Dad, can my friend spend the night? And I say no. So they go to my wife, Mom, can my friend spend the night? And she says no. Comes back to me, Dad, Mom said my friend can spend the night. Well, okay, I guess that's okay. But see how,
Right.
children are great like that. They're going to change, they're going to regroup, and they're going to keep trying. And that's my advice to you. Don't give up. Just try a different approach, gather more information, get some advocates, get some allies, some other stakeholders on your side, create an information security council, bring in other people in the campus community. You will be successful as time goes on. You just got to keep trying.
Thank you, Brian. Good advice. And that helps us not just with the technical part of the compliance, but also the social part of the compliance. Here's another poll question, attendees. Please take 30 seconds to answer. Has your institution been able to reduce cyber insurance premiums by adequate IT security and controls? Yes, we strengthened it, or we did it somewhat, or not yet, we're working on it. If you could please just take the next 30 seconds to answer, we'd appreciate that. And we'll move into the next topic, cybersecurity insurance. Now, this hits at different times of year for different institutions, depending on when their policies renew. But many insurance companies who provide cybersecurity insurance for institutions require an annual form or review to ensure that they can keep their premiums as low as possible. If they don't, then the premiums can go higher. I know that I have worked with K-12 school districts and higher eds that need to stay within compliance. We've worked to help lower those premiums and actually increase the coverage through low investment of time and money. So it's very important to stay on top of your cyber security insurance because the threats continue to grow every year. Here's the results of our latest poll. Has your institution been able to reduce cyber insurance? Yes, 33%, and then 33% are kind of still working on this. And then no, we have some more work to do. So it looks like everybody's kind of divided evenly between where they are. So what the coverage covers, which is issues in this area, it's data breaches. We know about ransomware. We talked about that. There's incident response. If your institution is held hostage by a bad actor and you cannot do business, then you have come to a halt. You're stopping servicing your students. And how do you get back online to continue to provide the services that you do? So there's, a lot of tips and methods to assess the situation you're in and to strengthen what you already have or add what you don't already have without a lot of effort and investment. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian and Vince, who can provide some insight on the schools that they work with and tips and tricks to manage cybersecurity insurance.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, with time, it's getting complex. Technology has evolved since where we have started decades ago, right? But then the dark players have evolved big time as well. And so is the cyber insurance folks, because they know now so many of actions happening out wherein the breaches are asking for ransom, and the efforts are tremendous. It's not easy for one to, just jump in the game and then get the data back, right? There is no guarantee, even if after paying the ransom, the data would be secure or these players were not going to publish it out. And I think cybersecurity insurance folks are right in terms of putting more kind of firmness in terms of what has to be regulated for an institutions or not. They become stringent, and I guess as we fly more time, that it will be more and more complex because they have to ensure that all of the institutions follow the right controls which is needed. And hence it will be a tough time for us to really follow off all of it. We should start with whatever is needed from the cybersecurity insurance. We do a checklist. We really ensure that we are prepared for the insurance firms while they connect with us next year, so that it's really not going to hit our premiums or the coverage. And it's very important. We can't really live without the insurance because they are the only safety where we are backed at times. Even if after following best of the controls, there is no guarantee that we would not going to expose our data. Following the encryption of the disk could also eventually, after doing so, the hackers could still reach the data encrypted and then make that data unavailable for you. And you definitely need that insurance to piggyback you in that conditions. And then these are primarily regulated now, since they have to also look at the compliance needs. So they intend institutions to follow the federal guidelines, the GLBA guidelines, the GDPR, and not just that, they have now come up with their own integrated guidelines, which covers all of the regulation possible, and really making sure that everyone within the institutions adhere to it. If they find that there are big controls which is missing, either they would not going to get you covered, or if they intend to cover you, the coverage would be pretty less as compared to what they were doing in last years. I'll open it for the Brian, since Brian recently worked with a couple of insurance folks, while he was targeting to close the insurance plans for the institutions where he was working as CISO.
Yeah, thank you, Vince. I know we're getting near the end of our presentation, and I'll try to be quick to leave time for questions, but 3 things on cybersecurity insurance. 1, the insurance providers, auditors, assessors, all those people, they are our friends. We have to look at them as friends. They're not the enemy. Yes, they're giving us more work, but they're helping us find ways to improve our security posture. Number 2, a real case, real live situation. I have seen an institution who had a multi-million-dollar insurance coverage for cybersecurity incidents drop down to $200,000 a year because they did not have MFA in X, Y, Z, A, B, and C areas. Sure, they had MFA, but not everywhere completely. In C, don't we miss those days? The auditor is there, you get an email, you're sitting there as an IT leader, and they say, hey, we need these policies. Oh, let me go online and get one and, tweak it a little. I'm going to send it over to you. Oh, and they leave you alone. No, they're now coming in and they're looking for revision dates. They're ensuring that management actually approved these policies. They're making sure that they were disseminated to the campus community, that the campus community was trained on these policies, and they're testing the policies. So there's no more sending out a quick email about cybersecurity training just to satisfy the checkbox. They're actually looking at records. They're pulling employees from human resources list, and they're looking at your training programs and how many trainings each employee took, and is targeted training happening. So it is getting a lot stricter from them, but again, look at them as an ally.
Great feedback on the insurance aspect of what we are working with. And our last poll question, attendees, please answer this last poll question. Does your institution have a written information security program, often called a WISP, or an IT security plan of some sort? Yes, we do. Well, we have some documentation, but no overall plan for the entire institution, or no, not at this time. If you would just take 30 seconds to answer that, we'd appreciate that. And I know we're getting close on time, so if we're not able to answer questions, then what we would like to do is still have you submit the questions to us. We will get our panel to answer them and get back to you. We also will be distributing this presentation to everyone. Related but separate compliance requirements. I think we covered 3 topics that have similarities, but they're for uniquely different essentials in an institution. And there is absolutely one thing that came through that is clear. There is a need for someone to mind these requirements, the IT security. It's more important than ever before to have someone responsible. And IT sometimes is looked at as, well, it just costs so much. But something like IT security can really cost you even more if you don't have it in place. And again, there's always money and resources as an issue, and Campus Consortium is happy to help try to find a way to affordably and access IT security and IT security controls, because we have many partners that offer wonderful services for our member institutions and to education in general. Does your institution have a written program? Looks like 63% do. We have documentation for our systems, so there's some 25%, and then some do not. So again, some of these things are just taking the time to an effort, as Brian had mentioned, to kind of move ahead and pull some information together. And then, just kind of a wrap up, compliance, regulation, best practices affects everyone in all areas of an institution, whether it's academics or admissions or advancements or, just about every area, athletic programs, everybody is impacted by compliance. And that's it. I want to thank Vince and Brian from Oculus IT. Vince, the Vice President for Information Security, and Brian, the Chief Information Security Officer, who work with hundreds of institutions across the United States. Appreciate your insight, your time, and your expertise, and offering our attendees some information. If our attendees would like more information, please contact us, Jennifer, Lily, or David. We're happy to provide you information, resources that we have, or any other resources that may help your institution in addition to IT security. We want to thank our panelists, Vince and Brian, and we also want to thank you, our webinar audience, attendees and participants. And shout out to also, I see Dan from CampusWorks has joined us, another partner and good vendor that provides services for us. And lastly, special thanks to today's sponsor, Oculus IT, where Brian and Vince provide their services from, and we're happy to put you in touch with them as well. And this presentation we can send to you. And if anybody who attended today would like to be a panelist on an upcoming webinar, we would love to have you. Please inquire. We have many topics. Also, if you have ideas for topics for our EdTech Think Tank webinars, we would love to hear from you, and we will do the research and get the speakers and panelists together and present. So my name's Carl. Thank you, thank you, Brian. Thank you, Vince. Appreciate your participation today. And I thank all our attendees for their participation in the poll questions, which we will get you a report. And I want to thank Lily and Jennifer and David from the Campus Consortium team for putting these webinars together for us. Hope you all have a great rest of the day. Take care.